Well, a very good evening to each and every one of you. I've had the good pleasure of standing in this pulpit a few times over the years, but it has been a while, and I'm happy to be back. There are many faces that I recognize, but there have been several changes, and that's always good too. There's some of you that I've known at other times at other places, and regardless of who you are or where you're from or how many times I've seen you, I didn't feel I was coming here tonight to be with strangers. I just felt I was coming to be with family. I want to say thanks to the elders here for the invitation to allow me to be here tonight and to talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I am now 76 years old, and I have been trying to preach the gospel for 55 years. I worked for many years in what we call the local work, standing in a pulpit and getting a weekly salary. The last church that I worked with was the East Side Church in Bowling Green, where I worked for 18 years. And after a lot of prayers, is that I made the decision to resign from the pulpit and give up my salary. So for these last 18 years, I haven't had any 2 months that I've had the same income. I have a little booth out at a antique mall, and I collect people's junk from their yard sales and then try to sell them in that booth. And but now living off of my Social Security, but God has not allowed me to starve to death. And so I want to share with you my passion for what I'm trying to do. I want to borrow a passage when the Apostle Paul had come back on his preaching journey. In Acts chapter 14, it says, "And when they were come and had gathered the church together, they rehearsed all that God had done with them." Now, the elders have gathered the church here tonight. They've invited me to come and to share stories about some of my travels. I might be the guy that gets on the airplane and flies across the ocean. I might be the guy that's sleeping underneath a tree somewhere. I might be the guy that's eating a barbecue dog. But I don't consider any of these trips my trips. I'm just a messenger boy. And so you're going to see tonight several pictures from several different countries. And people have asked me, well, why did I make up my mind to give up my salary and to give up the local work that I was doing? And I enjoyed it very much. I taught a Sunday morning Bible class. I preached Sunday morning. I preached Sunday night. I did a radio program. I did a bulletin. I tried to keep myself busy, and I loved it. But about 20 years ago, I was invited to give a lecture on the campus at Florida College. And so I gave statistics like this. Now you can see on the bottom of the chart, I updated this as of 2 nights ago. So you look at the world population at the top, and you look then at the U.S. population at the bottom. And there's quite a contrast there. The U.S. population is less than 5% of the world population. But the United States has about 90% of the world's gospel preachers. And I've been to many countries, just like I've been 4 times to Sweden, and there's only one church in Sweden. And George is not a full-time preacher. I work with Peter in Belgium. The church there has 3 members. I've worked with another Peter and Marlene. You'll see their picture shortly. In Indonesia, the church only has the 2 members there. And there are so many places around the world where there are no preachers. And so I chose to do what I did. I chose to step out of the pulpit to see if I could be useful and for the Lord in any way. And many times we go in and try to conduct leadership training classes. We try to help develop the Christians to be stronger, to develop Bible teachers, to develop more preachers, and certainly hoping to develop then more elders in more churches. I want you to know in the very beginning that regardless of what country I'm visiting, I have been to the Philippine Islands 31 times. I've been to Zimbabwe 17 times. I've been to South Africa 15 times. I've been to China 10 times and Vietnam 10 times and Indonesia 8 times and Malaysia 8 times. My job is not to go into any of these countries and make Americans out of them. My job is to take the gospel and try to preach it to make Christians out of them. Some of you remember that movie, The Wizard of Oz, where that Dorothy looked at the puppy dog and said, "We're not in Kansas anymore." Well, anybody that goes with me on any of my trips, and I have taken over 100 people overseas, but I remind them we're not in America anymore. And if you're wanting everything to be like it is at home, stay at home. If you insist that everything be like it is in America, whether that's your sleeping conditions or that's the food that you eat or the way that we're going to do it, because not every church in the world is going to have a song and a prayer and another song and a sermon and an invitation. I have preached for churches that as soon as we start, the very first thing we do is sing the invitation song. And the reason that they do that, they say, well, it's possible you've been studying at home. You realize the condition you're in. You need to do something. We don't want you to have to sit there and listen to an hour sermon before you can finally get it straightened out. So we take care of that in the very beginning. Another church that I love visiting, in the very beginning, they have 4 prayers before they ever sing a song. Now, we often teach independence and autonomy of the churches. You know, you have the right. God tells us what to do. He just doesn't tell us the order in which that we're supposed to do it, or how many songs, or how many prayers. You understand what I'm talking about? And so this one church has 4 prayers. And they'll say, all right, now, Collie, we want you to lead the first prayer, and we want you only to name those that are sick or families where there's been a death. Okay? And then we're going to come to another brother and say, now your prayer is for Thanksgiving. And now this other brother, your prayer is for doors of opportunity to open for evangelism. Whether in the community here, we certainly want that, or whether it's around the world. And so you're going to see a lot of diversity as you travel. And so I never want to hear any of the people that try to travel with me. I never want to hear them say, that's not the way we do it in America. We're not in America anymore. We're there to try to teach the gospel. Now, questions that I have to ask myself, and then anyone that wants to go with me on any of these trips. The first question is, what's the purpose of this trip? The second question is, who invited me for this trip? Now, I'm telling you the deep convictions of Bob, and I'm not trying to say my way is the right way or the only way, but I have deep convictions with some American preachers that say, oh, I think I'll go to Timbuktu and preach next month. Were you invited? Sometimes those brethren tell me, Bob, we just get an email from some American that says, well, I'm coming for 3 weeks, and they didn't ask us about the school calendar for our children. They didn't ask us about the farmers being out in the field taking care of their rice crops, and they often choose dates to come that are not convenient for us. And so I'll always bring this question up, well, who invited you? And who chose the date? Who made the schedule? How many times a day are you going to be teaching? Now, I just recently got back from my 31st trip in the Philippines. We had 8 classes a day. I taught 6 of them each day, and then we had 2 of the local men that would teach 1 apiece. And so they're the ones that make the schedule. They're the ones that decide what time we'll start. And now when I'm in Vietnam, Sunday is just a typical work day. And so you don't even start worship until Sunday night at 8 o'clock. And so you have to work on their schedule. And so you need to put that into your head before you ever leave America. And then what will be my expenses? Now, some of the places is that they can't afford to feed me. And so I carry enough money in my pocket and carry 2 jars of peanut butter in my suitcase that I get to survive. And but those are some of the simple things that you have to work on. Then the other question is, how long will you stay? Now, I believe there is a place for those that can go on trips that are relatively short duration. There are trips that can do a lot of good, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. There's an urgent need for those who can go and stay longer. There's an urgent need for some of the men that say, me and my wife are going to move and we'll stay a year in this place, or 3 years in this place, or 6 years in this place. There are some countries you can't do that. And so the government has restrictions. Now, let me go back just like the Philippine Islands. I can go into the Philippines free of charge for 30 days. If I hit day 31, I have to pay money. And so there are some of the countries that I have worked in that there are men that are living there now permanently, but every 2 months they have to cross into another country and spend one night and then come back in order to get another 60-day visa. So there's a lot of things to consider. Short-time workers can do a lot of work and can generate contacts for the long-term workers. But then if anyone's wanting to go with me, the question I have to ask, well, what will you be doing? What are your strengths? I am not a song leader. I only lead singing once a year. That's at Vacation Bible School when I've got 100 loud kids in front of me. I can get them excited and we can sing. He's got the whole world in his hands. And I always tell them, I said, now children, sing loud because I'm not a song leader. One little girl on the last day of VBS came up to me and said, Brother Bob, if you had tried, could you have sounded any better? And I said, no, I'm not a song leader. I know my limitations. And so I love it. I love it when I have people that go with me that can not only help in teaching and preaching, but can also lead singing. My son-in-law has gone with me, and he is an excellent song leader, and he has taught classes in singing. And so I look for men and women and teenagers. I need women that will go and teach ladies' classes, that will help teach classes for the teenage girls, that will help teach children's classes. Now, many times I don't have the advantage of having women, and so I just got home 2 weeks ago from Honduras, and it was their school vacation. So, you know, in Florida, in Kentucky, where I live, Vacation Bible School is usually June and July, but their school break is December and January. So each year we go in January to do a VBS. And so I was able to teach all of the classes for the children. Are you willing to do one-on-one teaching? Are you willing to do public speaking? Are you willing to teach on a certain subject? So maybe Collie is going to teach a class on church history. And maybe Dick's going to teach a class on the book of Revelation. And so what is your specialty? What would you like to be involved in? Or do you want to just go door to door and help distribute literature? Do you want to approach strangers and invite them to come to the studies? You've got to go with a plan. To do less than that is poor stewardship. Don't go without knowing why you're going. Don't go without knowing what you plan on doing it. Now, is my plan really needed at this time, at this place? Now, remember, I'm only going at the invitation of that church. It would be like me, say, Brother Magical, I want you to go to Clearwater and hold them a gospel meeting. And he says, well, Bob, who gives you the power to invite me to go to Clearwater? It ought to be the elders at Clearwater that do the inviting. But a lot of times I am witnessing that there are some Americans that are deciding for themselves. Is that, okay, I want to go to this place. or to that place. In traveling into these different countries, you'll do a better job the more of the culture that you understand. And I'm going to give just a couple of examples. Now, in Russia, they have a lot of pigeons, and pigeons drop a lot of ugly stuff on the sidewalk, and then you step in it. And so when you're on a bus or a train, if you cross your feet and if someone sees the sole of your shoe, that is equal to saying a dirty word for manure. So you need to learn to sit and keep your feet flat on the floor. The hardest one for me to get used to was to learn to belch. Because when I was growing up, if I dared made that noise in front of my grandma, she wanted an apology quick. But in some of the countries, the ladies that have prepared the meal for you do not think that you have enjoyed their food until you let out a loud belch. Now, I'm getting good at it, brethren. I can trap some air and I can let it bellow. And when I do that, oh, well, thank you, I'm glad you liked it. That's not my culture, but that's their culture, and I have to learn with that. Now, another one that I have to warn Americans about, on any of the countries that was ever under British rule, even though they speak English, a lot of their words don't mean the same thing that our words mean. Now, my car out there, I have a hood and a trunk. Their car has a boot and a bonnet. If I'm giving directions, I tell you to go down to the traffic light. They tell you to turn at the robot. The one that is the hardest for most Americans, if you're ever in a restaurant, do not ask the waitress to bring you a napkin. They think that you have a medical condition because a napkin is a baby's diaper. And so it's sort of important to know a few of those words. On my first trip to Hungary, right after communism fell in Eastern Europe and in Russia, the church where I was at in Bowling Green, we advertised for free Bible correspondence courses. And we signed up 200 people in Hungary and Romania to take the Bible course. And the one lady that was the first one to finish, she was a high school English teacher, and her husband, her husband was the curator for a cultural museum. And she had two sons, and the oldest son was in the Army. So I had her address. I'm heading off to Budapest to go visit her. And so I thought, every woman loves flowers, don't they? And so I thought it would just be polite of me to stop and get her a bouquet of flowers. And I don't speak Romanian, and the florist didn't speak English. And so I just point to a bouquet. I want that one. And she tells me no. Okay, maybe it's somebody's birthday and that was already spoken for. So I point to a second one and she tells me no. And I point to a third one and she tells me no. And so I thought, okay, what am I going to do? So I just reach up and just grab one before she has time to say no. So I grabbed this dozen flowers and asked her to put a red ribbon around it and then hold out the money, because I don't know how to convert it yet. And just take whatever it takes. So here I make the journey to Kutzen-Marton, and I have the address. I get to her flat. That's what they call an apartment. So I'm there at her flat. I knock on the door. I'm standing there holding this bouquet of flowers, and she opens the door. She sees the flower, and she lets out a blood-curdling scream and drops down to her knees crying. You only use a dozen flowers to announce a death. And her son's in the Army. And I show up with a dozen flowers. That was my mistake. I try to learn the cultures the best I can before I get to the country, but that was one that I had not been warned about. I did not know about it, and that was my mistake. Another one is in Asian countries, the way that you use your hands. I would say to one of you here, come here a minute, I need to talk to you. That would be okay in Tampa, Florida. But in an Asian country, doing that is equal to, in Tampa, sticking up your middle finger to somebody. And so it's very vulgar. So you do it underhanded like this. Something that simple can harm the effectiveness of your teaching the gospel. And then you have to learn to eat food that you might not like. And if you are picky and you don't think you can eat odd foods, stay in America, because you're not going to be effective if you don't use their food. Those women work hard to prepare for you. And so that's just part of the culture. And you make sure that you get permission before you ever make a photograph of a child. And so these are just some of the things that you have to work on. What version are you going to use? Now, I have preached in London, England. I've preached in Australia. I've preached in several countries. Things are changing to the good. I'm happy for that. There are some of the places I could only use the King James Version. You better not dare pull out an American Standard. They'd stop you right in the very beginning. But that's changing. But you need to know that in advance. Can I use the English Standard? Can I use the New American Standard? So what version can you use? Are they going to sing an invitation song? We're used to doing that. It's already been announced. We're going to sing one here shortly. But a lot of the foreign countries do not sing an invitation song. And like I said earlier, some of them have an invitation song in the very beginning. So you learn what is their custom, what is their habit, not what you're used to. And going into third world countries especially, you avoid expensive gifts. Now, I am required in some of the villages where I go, I have to go and visit the chief in order to get permission to teach. So in some of the places in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, is that I have learned I take a small flashlight for the chief and a chocolate bar for his wife. And you have to sit and visit with them for about 15 to 20 minutes and say, now, Chief, you know why I'm here. I'm asking permission to stay here in the village for a week and to have Bible classes. That's okay when you're visiting the chief. But be careful then if you're trying to hand out free gifts to anybody and everybody. I just recently read a report. I'm not going to mention where it came from or who the preacher is, but he was bragging that he bought $69 genuine leather Bibles, and he was passing out those Bibles in the villages. And I've learned from experience, they're usually sold in 2 days. And the rule that I make for Bob is that not until you have attended 2 or 3 days of the classes am I going to give you an expensive Bible. If I have learned that you are a good student, then I'm willing to do that. But there have been some Americans that have gone over and bought a dozen people a laptop computer, and they bought them a new camera. And there's a dozen that have bought them motorcycles. And Sewell Hall had a lecture at Florida College several years ago, and I have quoted him many times since then. American money has destroyed many of the foreign churches. And so we have to be real careful how we use that. Questions that might be okay for me to ask you here are considered too personal in some of the countries. And so you have to be careful with the questions that you ask. Do not use slang. Do not use jokes. Do not laugh among yourselves, because they'll think that you're laughing at them or about them. And so the question is often asked, well, who can make a trip like this? Well, I have 3 requirements. Number 1, you have to be the strongest of Christians. That's my number one requirement. Love the Lord. Be strong in your faith. Number two, you have to have a passport. You can't get on the airplane and go overseas without a passport. And number three, you still have to be walking and breathing. I'm not going to take dead people with me. But if you meet those three criteria, and number one being the top of my list, do you love the Lord? Is that I'm willing to travel with you, and I'm willing to help plan the schedule that the brethren want. Now here's a photo with three college kids. The two that are standing are brothers and sisters, and then the one there in the middle is their cousin. I don't know of anybody this age group. She attended Florida College. I don't know whether anybody here knows her or not. Here is one of the mission teams that I took, and the Outcalts that he had drowned in an accident, but his wife is a student at Florida College now, and their son had just recently graduated from Florida College. And so you see the diversity here. And sometimes is that there are ladies, they might be single, or they might be married, but the husband can't go, but the husband encourages the wife, you go. And so these women go and help teach the children's class or teach the women's classes. And then sometimes we do husband and wife teams. There's Wiley and Mallory Deason. They went as a husband and a wife team. And then also then here is Tolbert and another husband and wife team. So you can see the diversity of what we do. Now, this was half of the DeHutt family that many of you know them, and then some other preachers here. And here is a dedicated mother that left the kids at home, and then she went to teach the ladies' class and the teenage girls' class. This is Jack Hafer, who preaches in Salem, Oregon. Lord willing, he'll be arriving tomorrow night for the lectures. Is that he has traveled with me to Kenya and Uganda, gone to South Africa, and gone to the Philippines. And then the young girl over by the window, her father is an elder in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And so she had made the trip in order to teach the children's classes. This lady was a registered nurse, and she went with me, and she was teaching ladies' classes, teenage girls, and children's classes. But then in the afternoon, between classes, we offered a free medical clinic. A pharmacist in Indiana had donated a lot of drugs and vaccines, and we vaccinated the children against measles and mumps because they cannot afford those. And so she worked as her profession as a nurse. Iva was probably the oldest that ever went with me. Iva had never been married. She was 73 years old when she made this trip, but she was a jewel. She was fabulous, the way that she worked with the ladies' classes and the teenage girls. Now, this picture is old. Some of you might recognize that is Jason Longstreth, one of the professors at Florida College. And so he went with me many years ago. He traveled with me to South Africa and traveled with me then to Sri Lanka and then traveled with me to the Philippines. This particular picture is showing you his pulpit. We're underneath a tree, and we conduct classes like that in many of the villages. I took my daughter with me when she was 16 years old, then again at 18 years old, and then again at 21 years old. And then I took her and her husband and all three of my grandchildren. Now, this is an older picture. My granddaughter on the left-hand side, that is Deborah's oldest, and she is now a sophomore over at Florida College. And but they learn to love the international work, and the children are very valuable to teach other children in other countries. They love to talk about, well, how often does your daddy lead a prayer? Do you all sing songs before you go to sleep at night? And so the children can be used in a wonderful way to teach the other children. Quickly now, let me show you some of the Christians that I've referred to. So here is Peter, that the church meets in his home. There are only 3 members for the church in Belgium. He is asking that I come back later this year to conduct classes there. This is Marlene and Peter in Indonesia, and the church there consists of just these 2 Christians. Now, that is a Muslim country, so you have to be in secret in order to meet. If you're caught trying to convert somebody, they might cut your head off. And so you have to be careful about it. This young man is named Toddy. His true name is Mohammed. Toddy was his nickname because that was a famous soccer player in Egypt. I made 3 trips to Egypt to have classes with one student. His family was Muslim, and he and I started studying on the internet. Now, we were afraid to always stay in the hotel room, because if the maid knew that we were in there together, and then when they come and clean the room and start suspecting that we were having Bible classes, they would call the soldiers. So there are many times that we would go on an outing, and we actually one morning got up before sunrise and we climbed Mount Sinai and got at the top, and that way we could have Bible classes and there was nobody around to see us. Now, Toddy came to the United States after Florida College offered him a soccer scholarship. His father could not read English. Now, in order to apply at Florida College, you have to have a parent that will sign your application. And so he lays this paper on the desk and says, "Dad, sign this for me." And Dad says, "What is it?" He said, "Well, I'm going to go to school in America." And the father says, "Well, we don't have money for that." And he says, "I've been offered part of the scholarship to play soccer, and then Bob is helping me with what they're calling adopt a student." And so we brought him over here, and his father, after Toddy got to Tampa, his father found out he had become a Christian. And his father was anxious for him to come back home, because his father said, "For the dignity of our family name, I will publicly have you killed when you come back." That's how strong of a Muslim family he came from. And so, to make a long story short, Toddy actually took two different diplomas from Florida College so that he could stay here in Tampa for all of those years while I was working on the paperwork with my senator, Mitch McConnell, that we were applying for him to get religious asylum. And it took us a long time to do it. But finally, we got the paperwork all signed. And there's what he looks like today. And he's a hardworking young man. He has won some awards in real estate and in financial planning. And so he does great. Now, here's another young man that I brought to Florida College. I had made 8 trips to Malaysia, and I met this young boy that's leading the pack there on the left-hand side. And Wynn had a degree in optometry, but he was not allowed to practice that in America without going to an American college and taking 4 more years. He came to Florida College on a student visa, but on a student visa, you're not allowed to work off campus. So he couldn't go to Walmart or McDonald's to get a job, and he was able to work a few hours at Florida College, and then I organized a few people that would periodically send him a little donation. And so he did finish his diploma. He just graduated in December. and he is wanting to stay now because all he did is to take nothing but Bible classes. He had none of the English classes or biology or math, nothing but Bible classes. And he absolutely loved it. Now, his first 3 weeks while he was here, he would call me about every night. And when I would say hello, I'd have to say, all right, now you're going to have to stop crying so I can understand what you're talking about. And he said, but Uncle Bob, we sang a song in chapel today that I'd never heard before, and said those words were just absolutely so amazing. And then he got so excited one day, he called me and he said, you're not going to believe this. The president of Florida College, Buddy Payne, invited me upstairs to his office and we prayed together. And so he was just overwhelmed with that. And so this is a recent picture of him. And then last year at the lectures, he was asked to lead one of the prayers on the evening of one of the lectures. All right, now here's another one of my students. He was my student in China. And then later he followed me and was my student in Singapore. And so while I was teaching Bible in Singapore, Mingwei was working on his PhD in mathematics. So he graduated from Singapore, and so I contacted Florida College and I said, is it true you're looking for a new math teacher? I said, now I know Mingwei as a student, but I don't know him as a teacher. So I'm not going to stick my neck out there and let you chop it off, but I'm just recommending his name. If you want to contact him, if you want to interview him. And so to make a long story short, they did interview him. They fell in love with him. And so that is Dr. Mingwei that is now teaching the math classes at FC. I've had a lot of students to talk to me about Mingwei. And they said, I never ever dreamed that I could walk into a math class and get a Bible lesson out of it. But that's one of the things that people love about Mingwei, is that he loves to take any story or any example and get a spiritual story out of it. Now, this is one of the most unusual couples that I've ever worked with, because I had made a couple of trips to Sweden and had never found a Christian. I was beating the bushes, knocking on doors, going to businesses, and I could not find a Christian. Finally, George moved from Ghana, where I had been. He moved from Ghana to Sweden to get him a job. And so on the bus, he met Gabrielle, and they got to conversing, eventually got to dating, eventually got married, and they now have 2 grown children. She is the only Swede Christian. The church here is made up, everyone is either from Ghana, from Nigeria, or from India. And so the building that they're standing in, the contribution on Sunday morning is large enough that they can rent this building for Sunday morning worship. That's all the money they've got. And the building is located right beside the train depot, so that people can come from any direction and just walk up the steps, and there's where they worship. And then for all other Bible classes is that it would be in George's home. And so I have gone there on several occasions, and we do Skype classes and we do Zoom for all of our Bible studies and all of that. This is my good friend Abraham, that thought that my trips to China was to encourage him. The truth is, he was the one encouraging me. He was a college professor. He actually wrote the textbook that was used in physics. Somebody snitched on him and told that he was a follower of God. So he was arrested, and he spent 20 years in prison just because he would not deny his faith in his God. the soldiers would periodically beat him. And on one occasion, they took their belts and turned it around and used the metal buckle. And the buckle hit him in the left eye and blinded him in that eye. But he kept telling the soldiers, I will die in this prison before I would deny my God. Here are classes that we had in Ghana during the daytime trying to work on leadership development. I invited any man that thought that they would have an interest in trying to learn how to preach. I invited the men and their wives to come for daytime classes. So here are some of those that came in the daytime. And then at nighttime, I rented the convention center. And we reached crowds of 2,000 at nighttime. They're hungry to hear the gospel, and it's exciting to work with them. Here's one of the classes in Kenya. The building that you see overhead there, that building is built out of elephant dung. And so nothing fancy, but it accommodates them, and the churches are growing. I love the opportunities to go into high schools. And this was one of the schools in Kenya. And I was able to teach for 2 hours. These children were very attentive, very polite. They asked great questions, and I enjoyed my day with them. Here's a preacher training class that we had in Mozambique. We used some finances that had been donated by some Christians, and I rented a school building that we could use for our classrooms. And one of the things that we emphasize here in the leadership development is that the role of the church trying to develop elders. And so interest was great. Some of our classes are not in buildings. We're not in a church building. We're not in a school building. Sometimes our classes are underneath a tree like you see with this one. Lord willing, I'll be going back to Aruba just in a few more weeks. Is that I try to go during some of their school breaks and holidays, and we work with Vacation Bible School with these children. Now, you might know and you might not, so let me go ahead and throw this out. Aruba is owned by the Dutch government. As a result of that, drugs are legal, prostitution is legal, and you know we're at this period right now where that New Orleans is having Mardi Gras. You've heard about that, haven't you? And then Tampa has Gasparilla. Well, Aruba has Carnival. Now, what happens in Aruba makes New Orleans look like a Sunday school picnic. They have a night float, a parade, where that some of the people are actually fornicating on the floats. And so I go there during that week of Carnival, and I hope you don't feel bad towards me when I say this. We lock the children in the church building. We sleep on the floors. Is that we keep them off the streets for a week because they're a bunch of perverts. They've got a ring with a little needle on it. And if they come up and tap you on the back, you're going to pass out with drugs. And then 9 months later, these young girls are having babies and they didn't know how they got pregnant. And so we keep the children off the streets. We sleep on the floor in the classrooms. And I have class after class with them. We sing a lot of songs. We play a lot of Bible games. And then the women will bring our meals to us there, and we eat on the grounds. And so it's a bad situation that we try to make it as good as we can. Now, this is Thang, who was withdrawn from. He was disciplined by a large church in Delhi, India, because they said he was too conservative. Because he constantly asked, well, where's the Bible authority for this? And so, but I don't know why you'd want to do this. I don't see that in the Bible. So they withdrew from him. So he started a new congregation, and this is part of the group of Christians that there are classes in many of the homes, and they're growing and they're doing great. And almost everybody in this church, now this congregation meets at the YMCA close to the airport. And so this church, almost everybody here is highly educated. You have a lot that work for the government. You have some that are school teachers. You have business people. And all of these folks speak English, which makes it real easy for me to teach more classes. Now, as you travel, your variety of food is going to be different. And let me repeat what I said earlier. If you are picky in what you're going to eat, stay at home. Now, I do make some exceptions for some of the people that travel with me. Now, some of the places we eat in the homes, and they do the best they can with the finances they have. And sometimes we have a great meal like what you see here. They always provide a lot of fresh fruits, and I enjoy that. On the recent trip to the Philippines, they took me to a restaurant that a Filipino lady had married an Italian man, and at their restaurant they advertised it as a 1 meter pizza. So it's 4 different flavors and styles here and one big pizza. Now that was some good stuff. But now in Ghana, I had my choice on what I wanted to eat. I could either have beans and rice, or I could have rice and beans. Now that's what I ate for breakfast. That's what I ate for lunch. That's what I ate for supper for 14 days. I just can't tell you how badly I would love to have had a BLT sandwich or even a grilled cheese sandwich. But this is what I ate for 3 meals a day for 14 days. But you can look at me, I didn't die. God took care of me. And so I think about some of the food, and I think about the Apostle Paul. I try to become all things to all people to try to win one of them to the Lord. Now, it does get worse. You know, sometimes is that we have a big pot like this where that we're cooking what would be equal to us cooking grits, and they cook it and it becomes almost like cement, and then they scoop you out a bowl of it. And so if you eat a bowl of this on Monday, then Tuesday and Wednesday, you just have to drink a glass of water and it will swell up inside you. The typical child in some of these villages are eating 3 meals a week, not 3 meals a day. Now, I do not live as an American tourist when I'm in any of these countries. I live among the people. Is that only twice in 36 years of doing foreign work have I stayed in a motel room. I live among the people. I eat what they eat. And sometimes it's not what I would really want, but it sustains me. Is that I was given some money by some Christians in Bowling Green, and they said, use this at your discretion. So I got tired of eating that mealy meal, and I found a farmer that sold me a goat. And we skinned him and we barbecued him, and that was some of the best meat that I think I had eaten in a long, long time. Because sometimes what they might offer you, we wouldn't even consider that food, just a bowl of intestines. And I don't want to try to eat that. I know of 5 times that I have eaten dog, and that's what this is. This is dog with onions in a stew. Now, if I'm going to have to eat a dog, I do prefer barbecue dog over the stewed dog, but it gives a new meaning when you talk about a hot dog. And here are the little sardines that are covered in hot chili peppers, and it's so hot and it burns so bad you can't taste how bad it tastes. And so you just throw it in your mouth and chew it twice and swallow it, and you can get by. Quite often, you're offered chicken foot soup. That gives you a little something to chew on, and then you can use the toenails to clean your teeth with, but there's not a whole lot of meat on there. And down in Colombia is that they had killed a crocodile, and we barbecued the foot, and that was our lunch on that particular day. These are grubs. You throw them in a skillet and put some hot oil and shake them around. And then when you put it in your mouth and when you bite it, it's like hot butter popping into your mouth. Now, real quickly, let me close it down now. Some of the differences in culture. One of the hardest things for me in places like India and in Sri Lanka is that if I'm preaching and a fly lands on my lip, my first reaction is to knock it off, right? You can't upset a fly or a mosquito because that might be somebody's grandma. See, by believing in reincarnation, they believe that everything that dies comes back in another life form. And so you cannot swat away a fly or a mosquito. According to the Hindu scriptures, they accept 33 million 33 million gods. They worship everything. When you get on the highway, you see a few things that you wouldn't see on the roads in Florida. There is taking the straw a little overloaded, wouldn't you say? Well, what about this one? It's a taxi. So how many people can get on there wanting to go to the next town? And an overloaded truck. The cows have the right of way because, again, the highest form of life for a Hindu is the Brahma bull. Now, I made a mistake by giving a guy my camera and asking him to make my picture when I went up there to put my hand on the Brahma bull. It's a wonder they didn't shoot me right on the spot. People started screaming and hollering, "Don't touch God!" Because this is the highest form of human life. Now, we went to the river one day to baptize a lady, and as we were leaving the river, I started seeing all of the jewelry along the side, and I knew what that meant. Because in India, when a woman dies, they remove everything that she owns from the house. So the children and the grandchildren go up and down the banks of the river, throwing out her necklaces and her bracelets and all of her jewelry, and then they scatter all of her clothes over around the bushes. They then shave her head and they scatter her hair, and then the bed sheet that she died on, they wrap her body in that bed sheet, put her on a raft, douse her with gasoline, catch her on fire, and then push her out into the ocean in order to be cremated, in order to burn. So the culture is different in many, many different places. To go to some of these places in Vietnam, some of the roads you could not use an automobile, so I have to rent a motorcycle to go to some of these places. Very difficult passages. But then when you get up to the top of the mountain, one of the preachers raises dogs in order to sell the fresh meat to the restaurants. So that's how that he provides for himself. The brethren built a new chapel. We thought we were so far up the mountains, we were so far in the back area, nobody can travel by automobile, and that it would be safe to have a chapel and nobody would ever know. Were we wrong? Apparently, some soldier spotted it from an airplane. We had one worship service, and then the communist soldiers came in there with a sledgehammer, and this was the result. They knocked the building down. They hoisted a communist flag up and says, "We don't want Christianity in this country." Here are some of the brethren that we've met with in some of the homes. This is a photograph that was just made just a few weeks ago in the Philippines. There were 15 preachers that drove for 15 hours to come down to where I was located to stay for 10 days for Bible classes. Some of the Christians in Bowling Green donated some money. We bought some small mattresses, and then several of the ladies donated bed sheets. And so we had 6 men sleeping on the floor in this classroom. But never did I hear a complaint. They were so happy to come to the Bible classes. I taught 6 classes a day. I was almost running out of spit, Collie. And so I taught 6 classes a day. And then we would have 2 classes where that 2 of the local preachers would give a lecture. This was on the bed in my hotel room in China. These 4 people are holding a Bible for the very first time. They had never seen a Bible before. They are reading Genesis chapter 1. I wish I had time, but it's time for me to shut up and get out of the pulpit. But the first class that I teach in China, I always tell them I am impressed with your Chinese language. The Chinese language is based on the first 12 chapters of the book of Genesis. And they don't believe me. And I said, well, let me just show you a picture, and then you break it apart. If you look at the word temptation, I said, break it apart. Because see, if I just flash the chart, they say the word immediately. I said, no, break it apart. And they said, it's 2 trees in a garden. I said, do you know any story about 2 trees in a garden? I said, what's this next word? Pain. I said, break it apart. Woman chooses wrong tree. What about this word? Ship. I said, break it apart. 8 people on a big boat. Do you know a story about 8 people on a boat? And so if they let me go through that first lesson on the history of the Chinese language, I've never had a student that did not want more. And so they're reading Genesis chapter 1 for the very, very first time. Thomas and his wife stayed up until 2 a.m. because I only had 1 songbook. And they wanted to handwrite, to have their own songbook. And so there is his copy where they were handwriting it. Some of the ladies are small enough, we can baptize them in the bathtub. And here are some of the World War II Jeeps that were left over in the Philippines. Those now operate sort of as a taxi service. I have taught inside all 3 of the prison systems, the minimum, the medium, and the maximum. I've been inside so many times that we have developed a good relationship, and the government offered a free plot of land if I could gather enough money to build a chapel. And I'm happy to tell you, by the grace of God and the contributions from some of my brethren, that we now have a chapel in all 3 of the prisons. There have been over 120 baptisms inside the prisons. And what's wonderful is that after they, depending, now if they're in maximum security, they're probably never going to get out. They committed murder or something like that. But many of them, they're in medium security, might just be for 6 or 7 years, and then they move down to the minimum security. And their last year, they have counselors that work with them and help them choose an occupation. And then for 1 year, they train them. Do you want to be a carpenter? Do you want to be a mechanic? Do you want to learn to operate a printing press? Do you want to work in a restaurant? And then they serve that last year, and then they go home. And there have been 3 churches that have been established in other villages after they served their prison time and went home. Here's another one of the high schools where I taught, and I always love being with these young people. Now, for my last pictures here, I will warn you in advance, they're not pleasant to look at. Just every few months, you hear of another typhoon going through the Philippines. And here you can see the family walking out, and none of the houses are still standing behind them. Here you can see the ship that is no longer in the water, it's up on the land. That's how strong the storm was. Here you can see all of these black body bags. These are the people that died in the storm. And here is a father that is walking out with his dead child. And then the question comes up, well, what are we going to do about worship on Sunday with the floods that we have? And they said, well, we can't let the water stop us from worshiping God. So here they are in their chapel with the water halfway up their legs, but they're singing their songs and they're there to worship God. There's what a typical pew would look like in Zimbabwe. This would be a good time for you to pat that padded pew that you're sitting on. I'm standing here in the river. There had not been any rain for 3 years. That's why there are no crops. That's why there's so many Christians that are hungry. And water is very scarce. You have to walk for a few miles to go to a pump in order to get water. These young ladies right here told me they had not had a bath for 3 years. They go behind the bushes, remove their clothes, put sand on their body to wipe off the perspiration. But water is so scarce. When you walk that far to go get the water, and then you have to walk back with that heavy load on your head, you only use that for drinking or cooking. You don't use that to take a bath. The only exception is when that we had a man that wanted to be baptized. They dug a hole, covered it with plastic, and then all of them donated all of their water to put in there so that we could baptize that man, which meant that they had to walk now for hours to go back then to get more water. My last pictures, my typical child in the village is not eating 3 meals a day, but 3 meals a week. This is what starvation looks like. That's not from eating too many Big Macs. This is what starvation looks like. On one of my trips, I was arrested. I hope you won't fault me for being a criminal, but my crime was feeding the children. The president said that he had rather the children die of starvation than to accept an American charity. And so I'm going to continue doing what I believe the Lord would want me to do. And I do often collect donations from Christians that say, use this at your discretion. And so this is one of the things that I often do. My last picture. At the end of every service, we can start over here, and you're going to be the song leader. And so you start singing the song, and then you get up and walk out and stand right outside the door. Then your wife comes out and stands right beside you. And then we just come on across, and one by one you come out and you either hug or you shake hands or you cry on each other's shoulders because we're singing the song, God be with you till we meet again. And I have never been at any Sunday morning service where that we close with this song and embrace each other, and then when I come back next Sunday, there's one person missing. I've never been there where that everybody that's there this Sunday is still alive and back next Sunday. That's what you see. And so let's pray for them. Let's do what we can to help them. And I appreciate the invitation to be here. I'm sorry I went a little bit longer. As a result of that, you won't have to come tomorrow night. But thank you for allowing me to be here and for sharing this with you. And I pray that we can give God the honor and the glory that He deserves.